Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our March webinar. As we wait for people to kind of trickle in here soon, I do want to mention that we have a Q&A. So if you have any questions for us that you would like to have answered, please put them in the Q&A below, and we will get to them at the end of the webinar. But we'll kind of get into our agenda here. We have some market updates to discuss with you all and kind of talk about contract talks out on the US East and the Gulf Coast. And then we'll kind of wrap up with some questions from you all. But Justin, Ben, I'm going to kind of toss it to you if you guys can kind of share what some of these market updates are kind of happening in the industry with our audience today.
Sure. So let's start with the Panama Canal, and we have the Suez Canal. Not a whole lot has changed in that situation. It's been 2 months since we had this, but not a lot has changed. The Panama Canal is getting a little bit better, I believe, now towards the end of this month here. They're starting to have 27 vessels go through there on a daily basis, and normal season it would be 36 right now. So it's still a little bit less than we would like. And the Suez Canal, there's still no high dollar cargo going through there. Correct, Ben? It's still at the same as it was 2 months ago. But the market since Chinese New Year, it's not booming, but it's pretty typical for this time of year here. So I don't think we're seeing huge impacts due to these issues here quite yet, but it's something to pay attention to and keep your eye on. And there's some delays coming into the West Coast, and that's going all the way up from Canada down through Long Beach here, and that's to get to the rail. So your IPI, your stuff that's going inland here. Ben, do you want to touch base a little bit on that and tell us what's going on there?
Well, I do want to address the canals first, but this does
Sure.
we talk about them every month, and it's just become normal now. And we have to be cautious of what normal means, just because a lower volume through these canals or none through the Suez, um, at a time when the volume and the demand is low. So when demand increases again, as it seasonally does in late summer, midsummer, the effect is going to be much greater than other years. When you're allowing 36 vessels through normally last year, and the demand was steady, well, if we're at 2/3 of that, the same kind of increase this year would cause a much greater effect than it had last year.
Right, so you're going to see a lot more congestion on the West Coast or in other areas, and once you start pulling vessels or pulling freight from going through the canals and it's going elsewhere, or you're seeing longer delays, you're going to see different congestion all throughout the system in general.
That's right. So rainy season ending, this is the normal, but this is the normal according to a low demand level. And when we see seasonal increases this summer, I expect to see a much greater shock to the ecosystem to these canals or around them.
And the crazy part is, so yeah, we haven't seen a whole lot, and that's the thing is right now, today, when it's going through the Panama Canal, yes, it's still getting there. It's still getting to the East Coast, and we're still routing our own cargo, our customers' cargo through the Panama Canal at this point. And we're going to touch base on a few reasons why that might change coming up here. But you have to be cautious of it once the demand increases as to what's going to happen. But today, it's not impacting people it's severely. It's not, right? It's kind of there. And if we talk about rates were building up to Chinese New Year, right? They were starting to get kind of crazy, and people were starting to get a little leery of it. And while they kind of capped off and they dropped down a little bit, they didn't plummet right after it. They're holding pretty steadily at this point. And one of the reasons is you have a lot of these situations here. You have the two canals, right? And those are pretty severe situations. And now we're going to touch on the delays that you have on the West Coast. And one of the reasons possibly is a shortage of labor out there across the West Coast. And so you're seeing little things over here, but when you put them all together, or one really goes crazy or demand starts to increase, our system is pretty fragile. So again, at this point, people having stuff go through the West Coast and coming across into the middle of the US, into Chicago, into Dallas, wherever, you're seeing a delay. And that delay is hitting, Ben, right? It's hitting once it hits the West Coast. And to get on the rail, it's taking 7 to 10 days to do that versus 2 to 3.
That's right. And it's really hard to pinpoint what the reason is. You and I, Justin, discuss some of the possible reasons, and we attribute this 7 to 10 days taking container from the port onto the rail average. Sometimes maybe 14, and some days surprise you, just be over in 3 days. But it might sound counterintuitive, but there is less demand, not just like demand for the freight, but expectation demand to move that container inland quicker for lower exports. The containers don't have to be flipped around as quickly when the demand for exports is low too. So on the other hand, we have more freight coming through the West Coast because of the Panama Canal. So there is a higher volume, but a lower expectation for moving the containers faster.
Higher volume for the amount of cargo that is actually moving during this period of time,
Yeah.
right? Because of the Panama Canal, right? So it's not that there's an excess volume, it's not that there's a boom in the economy, nothing like that, but it's a higher volume that's going through the West Coast simply because less is going through the Panama Canal. And now the next update of what we're talking about that has happened, that has popped up since our last webinar, is the contracts for the labor on the East Coast. Now let's talk about this, Ben, here, because there's a lot of speculation that this could be have a huge impact. This could have no impact. What exactly is going on here? And we just went through this last year on the West Coast. This is an election year, so there's different things being said about that. But, you're talking about the ports, every single port and container yard that's from Maine all the way down to Texas here. And, this would have a huge impact if something actually did come about, and they're asking for some pretty severe hikes in wages. So
Yeah.
what were you hearing about this one, or any expectations, or what people should be thinking about it at this point? I know that they have contracts that they're supposed to try to start to work on in May or come to some sort of agreement, but
Yeah, I think they start their local contracts ahead of time, and Emily's provided a lot of content, and all of it is citing very loud and aggressive stance from the Longshoremen's Union president. It seems like it's a long ways off, but they start this early with that position so that as we see walkouts or work stalled in the preceding months, you'll know that you were expecting this. And as we've seen with most labor contract negotiations, this will go right up until September 29th or beyond. This is not going to settle in the summer or anything right up until the very end.
no. And one of the things that I was hearing was that they were talking about the power and the impact that they know that they now have throughout the pandemic. They realized that, hey, we can be a big sore thumb to the rest of the economy here. And, if these guys do something here, it will cause a huge increase for the cost of goods coming in for your holiday seasons and so on. I mean, the timing of this, it's intentional. It's right there at the peak season here. And so much that I know we have it written up here that could this impact the peak season to start early. That we've seen a couple of the carriers saying that people are just going to bring stuff in earlier. I've never witnessed that, and I don't know how people are going to start to plan to do that. Doesn't seem very logical to me, but maybe. Regardless, is again, they know the vulnerability of the situation here, and it seems like the longshoremen are trying to take advantage of that, and maybe rightfully so. Maybe they deserve these wages. I'm not saying they don't, but it's putting us in a sticky situation.
And the last negotiations were 6 years ago. So certainly a lot has changed, inflation, cost of living. and something is due, the longshoremen. And I think you're referring to notices from ONE's president and Hapag-Lloyd's president that said, if there's going to be disruption on the East Coast, then importers will start bringing the goods in. They'll have it manufactured sooner and they'll store it longer. That's coming from two ocean carriers. So I agree.
Yeah, I haven't heard any of the importers or representation of them. There's representation of your athletic wear, your footwear, all types of stuff talking, and they certainly weren't saying that they were going to start bringing this stuff in early. So I'm not 100% sure where they're coming up with this.
But it does interestingly tie into the traditional pre-holiday season when peak seasons are usually the peak season surcharge is added on to the ocean carrier freight charges right around August, September. So we've always marked our calendars for the middle of October. Everything has to be out by the middle of October in order to make it onto the shelves in time for Black Friday. So very narrow window of time between when the agreement ends and when cargo has to ship out in order to get on the shelves in time.
But I also think now that you mentioned that, Ben, it's an interesting date to throw out there. That was in the past, and that's when the Panama Canal was running smoothly and everything else. And so it'll be interesting to see if some of these other disruptions cause something to affect that date, especially for things going to the East Coast, or if the delays continue to happen on the West Coast, or those delays even increase on the West Coast. Certainly hope they don't, but it's something that I do think people have to watch, and we really have to keep our thumb on it. And you have to know your options. And by that, I mean, when I'm talking options here, and we talk about it all the time, is there are certain times where if you need something and you're finding out at the last minute, you can change the bill of lading, you can change the destination to be on the West Coast and truck it all the way to Chicago or wherever you're looking at. There are certain options, or if you know ahead of time, there might be a faster carrier, there might be a faster transit time. There's just different things that I think that people really need to know about right now in order for when they're going to see these. And you're seeing slight delays right now, 7 to 10 days on average, so sometimes 14 days, but I'm not, hopefully it doesn't get worse, but it certainly looks like at this moment that if the demand increases, it will get worse.
Right. Yeah. Oh, one of those tricks I'll just detail right here quickly. If you're a U.S. importer and you control the freight on X works or FOB terms, and you're inland, so let's just take Chicago, for example, it's going to rail through Los Angeles to Chicago. But because of delays at origin or for whatever reason, you know that the arrival to Chicago is going to be too late. In the week before it arrives to Los Angeles, speak with your freight forwarder, have them change the shipping instructions to terminate that container in Los Angeles. And there, your freight forwarder should take it out of the port, transfer the cargo to a truck trailer, and drive it to Chicago. A little bit higher, but if it means meeting your deadline, that's an alternate plan you should know about.
Likewise, if you know about it beforehand, again, there are carriers out there that can expedite it, and they get there faster. It's just something to look at, and they're definitely more expensive. So what we're saying is know your options, know the cost, and make the best decision that's for you. I don't think either of us are suggesting that you want to pay more to do this stuff, but if you're pushed up against the wall here, you need to know your options.
Yep, sure thing. And this will be the first year where we are going into the peak season around Cape of Good Hope and not through the Suez. So when you're talking about that thin timeline between when the East Coast agreement settled and you have to ship cargo out to make the holiday sales, well, it's 2 extra weeks if it's coming from India. But, myself, I don't believe that the Suez Canal situation will be settled 4 months from now. I think
Yeah, I haven't seen anything myself, and listening to a lot of the blogs and stuff like that, the certain professors and stuff, what they're saying is they think even if it ended today, that you're still going to see effects for quite a while here, just because of the backlog, and that we have yet to really see the ramifications of the effects of these issues at the moment here. Again, it's not to be an alarmist. It's just to say that these things could be impacting you guys, and know your lanes and know what it's going to take. Because Ben, right now, let's talk about that for a second here. You're saying that we used to, you used to go through the Suez Canal. That's not an option now. So now you're going down past Cape Good Hope under south of Africa. Right now, that's what, 14 days, 14 days longer?
Right.
What happens if as demand increases? Is that going to be affected?
Certainly. And we're not the only importers in the world. You have
Right.
European market, they'll be trying to get containers on those same ships. Especially if there's a stop off in Europe before crossing to the
So yeah, it is a trickle effect, and there's a lot of things that can impact this, whether it's a strike, whether it's terrorist act of terrorism, whether it's the Panama Canal, which has dried up a bit. There's a lot of things that can impact this here, and we're trying to present and lay it all out for you guys to see what's going on. But again, I think at the moment, things for what's going on and everything that's happening, it's relatively smooth, with minor delays. I think, in my opinion, if we want to touch on that for a minute, Ben, I think that the price, they went sky high in 21, 22, and then they started coming down, um, especially in the Trans-Pacific lane, and then they dropped. I mean, they plummeted, and they plummeted to lower than it was before the pandemic. And now it's bounced back up, and there's been inflation. There's been a lot of stuff. Everyone knows about that. The cost of labor has gone up. So it's bounced back above where it was in 2019. Let's just use that as a barometer. And I think it's settling somewhere. And who knows where exactly that's settling, but I think that's what it's trying to figure out right now. Is the market is trying to figure out where the rates can settle.
Sure. And there's a lot of carriers that are merging together. These conglomerates are still making new packs. Maersk and MSC are separating, but Maersk and Hapag-Lloyd are going to join together. So in a way, you have fewer choices and less competitiveness that was driving the price as low as it went last summer. So I think long term, if we're looking 5 years out, we're not going to see rates dip as low as they did last summer. And part of that is, as you mentioned, the higher costs all around. And the other part of it is fewer carrier options as they merge together in alliances. Assume each other. Maersk taking Hamburg Süd and Sealand.
Yeah, it's an interesting time. It's interesting to see where it's going to go, what's going to happen, and how these things are going to work themselves out. But I think that it's still a very good time to have a clear understanding of what you're trying to accomplish, where things need to go, and what you're trying to do. I mean, we have a lot of customers. We're seeing a lot of things. They're moving there. There's suppliers to areas like Mexico and stuff. That happened a lot from the pandemic, where people are trying to get it as close as possible and how they're doing it. So that's a big lane that, um, I think a lot of importers are starting to focus on. They're trying to move stuff away from China, but we're still very dependent upon China. Let's not think that we aren't.
Yeah, nearshoring will be a big topic for this national election and for the one after that, 4 years. And speaking of national elections, and if you're an exporter, you're wondering what impacts there are on you in the freight world, it is pretty smooth. There's a lot of container availability at all ports and rail ramps. But there's also a lot of national elections happening this year. So when we're mentioning labor union talks in the United States, they're going on in many other countries around the world. And if you're exporting to Europe, you may want to be aware that the climate there it's getting more tense. Last year we saw French and German rail union workers go on strike and have walkouts. That affected, if you remember that about a year ago now, the cost and the availability for getting bookings on ships. I expect that to happen somewhat again this summer. There could be other countries too, all around the world. We're seeing national elections, and I think I mentioned this a couple months ago, in so many nations that it represents a total of about 60% of the global GDP is having an opportunity to replace the national leader.
Yeah, that's pretty mind-boggling right there. All right, Emily, what do we have another what's on our next slide here for our listeners? Okay.
Yep, so we actually are gonna give you guys a poll here. We appreciate you guys coming every month, and so we'd like to hear some feedback from you on what topics you guys would like us to touch on. If there's something in particular that you want us to hear, we'd love to hear that feedback. So you should see it pop up on your screen. But yeah, we'll end here. Next Coffee and Cargo is gonna be April 17th, 10 a.m. Central Time. You can email any of us if you have any additional questions from this webinar or just in general. We have our emails here below. And yeah, thank you guys for coming. Emily, Justin, Ben, thank you. And we'll see you guys next time.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Yep.